new postdoc scholar in WRRC with the Department of Earth Science. So he has PhD degree in geology and geophysics, specializing in hydrology under Dr. Ali Ekadi. And he got the bachelor's degree in environmental science from the University of Oregon. So his current research is focused on the sustainability of groundwater resources in the territory of American Samoa. Okay, so the title of the talk is the Working Together Using Cloud-Based Collaborative Platform to Keep Multi-Stakeholder Hydrological Projects and Implements.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for coming out to talk today. So today I'd like to talk a little bit about a number of the research projects that I've done over the last couple of years. I think a lot of you are fairly familiar with them, having actually worked with me on a lot of these projects over the last couple of years. But really, instead of focusing on the specific content of those projects, I wanted to talk about a couple of underlying themes that drive a number of those projects. And it's themes of like collaboration and organization. So before I go any farther, I'd also want to acknowledge the contributors and collaborators that helped for a number of these projects, without which these projects couldn't be possible. So that's Ali El-Kadi here at Water Resources and Earth Sciences, Celia Smith over in Botany, Mia Comoros-Reynal, who is a previous research scientist over at the American Samoa Environmental Protection Agency, and Katrina Mariner and Matt Erickson, hydrologists over at the American Samoa Power Authority. So I wanted to start this talk with a little bit of a story. The story is essentially kind of how I came to realize the importance of my own workflow professional organization. So it was about a year into my graduate school career. One day I came to work, turned on my monitor, and saw this one, the blue screen of death, right? So not being able to do anything else, just looking at the on-screen prompts there, I tried to fix it, tried to restart it a couple times. Every single time, went back to the screen. That didn't really work. Tried the advanced options thing. I had no idea what I was doing with those. So eventually I gave up and then took my computer up to the 8th floor to the tech folks over in Post and asked for their help. So they were super friendly, super helpful. And they basically told me, yeah, all I needed to really do was just wipe the machine, reinstall the OS, and it'll all be fine, right? So I said, okay. And they asked me if I needed to back up my data. And I said, I've got one of these little hard drive backup thingies that you plug in and it keeps doing the little automated backup. So I should be good. That's been plugged in the whole time, no problem. So they did their thing, sent me back home a couple of days later with my fresh new Windows 7 operating system. And I plugged in my little backup hard drive thingy and quickly realized that I must not have set up the little backup hard drive thingy correctly, and that actually none of my data was backed up. And so I still remember that, the sinking feeling in my stomach when I realized that. And when it really came down to it, it really wasn't that bad. I actually didn't really have that much data at that point to really back up, and I was able to pull really everything that was important up, out of email attachments and that Google Drive folder that kind of automatically saves everything with a Google Drive link in your email. So I got most of the stuff back, but really what this experience kind of made me realize was that there's got to be a better way to do things, and a better way to organize my stuff, a better way to keep my files organized. And so that's kind of what this talk is about, is sort of the continuation of that journey of kind of looking for a better way to keep myself organized. And now that I work with a number of different people throughout American Samoa and Hawaii, finding better ways to keep all of us organized and to really enhance the collaboration and workflow for the work that we do. So if there's a better way, there has to be an old way. And I'll kind of go from my own perspective as a hydrologic modeler. So I'll start with what the old way would be, say that it's 2001, late 90s, or me before I had my computer crash. Sort of the typical workflow that a modeler would use would look something like this, right? So you get your input data, you do some pre-processing on it, you run your models, do some post-processing, and then make some pretty progress, right? And the key thing in this time era is that all of this would happen on your personal computer, right? So this is the era of the PC. We don't use punch cards anymore. Everything's happening on your desktop. And really the main kind of connectivity between your computer and the rest of the world is like an email connection or using a CD-ROM or a flash drive to get data back and forth, right? But there's kind of some underlying issues in this paradigm. One of which is that kind of connectivity is sort of low bandwidth. CDs only hold so much data. If you're using AOL, you can only attach so many megabytes of files. If you have an experience like I did that number of years ago when your computer breaks, you're pretty bummed out about that. And then you're also limited by your local machine. So I think this is probably one of the biggest reasons that people have moved away from this paradigm, because it's not very scalable. If you need more compute, you have to buy more compute, maintain it, keep it on your desk, and that gets expensive pretty quickly. And then also collaboration requires just a significantly larger amount of back and forth. So just think the difference between using Microsoft Word and like track changes to do different versions of a document versus Google Docs, where everybody can edit at once, see what different people have put in there, and like in real time look at different versions, right? So that's kind of this new paradigm that I'm talking about, is essentially moving from that personal computer space to the cloud computing space, where essentially you're only using your desktop or the web browser, and then all those other functions that we used to use their computers for can happen online. So instead of using your hard drive, you can use cloud storage. Instead of using your processor, using other people's processors. And there's also all kinds of different ways for us to connect, collaborate, expand, work together outside of those few traditional methods that I was describing earlier. So I will say what this talk won't be is a review or overview of all the new options for modelers to use these services. For one thing, because I'm not really an expert in this kind of thing, so I'm still mainly a hydrologist, not a data scientist. And then another thing, the amount of services that are out there right now is humongous. It's just absolutely overwhelming. I started trying to put together a list of cloud service providers. Maybe I got 20 or 30, and I think there's probably hundreds of these providers out there, and they have different pricing schemes. Some are free, some charge you, some do this or that. There's a whole lot of options for that. There's definitely less cloud compute providers out there, and there's a number of free ones, but most of these are things that you generally pay for, but they offer pretty high processing rates. This is a list of just a couple of the ones kind of more focused on kind of coding development, model development, that kind of thing. And there's a whole lot of things that could kind of fall into this collaboration facilitation category here. Even things like GoToMeeting and Skype and Zoom and Slack, things like that. This list here are all sort of collaboration applications that I found that really focus on kind of that development coding side of things, where you can essentially code collaboratively in real time with people remotely. So be working on the same piece of code, be running it on different kernels, all at the same time, working together. So that's what these examples are. So there's a lot of things out there. Today what I'll really focus on is just my kind of tiny corner of knowledge instead of the 800 apps that exist. I know about 7 of them, and to be honest, probably most of these are outdated by now since this field moves really fast. But there are things that I've used in my different projects and that have really enabled my projects to go kind of beyond what they could have been. And then also, I really like these applications because all of them are open source or kind of free to us sort of thing. They're already sort of included with the Google Suite that we have connected to our email addresses here at the university. And these are all things that are fairly simple. So they're simple enough for me, a non-data scientist. Hopefully they're simple enough for the collaborators and stakeholders that I'm trying to work with to understand as well. So the projects that I'll kind of focus on that use these applications, there's a couple of them that I'll go through today. So one of them is a collaborative framework that I've been working on for about 3 years now. So I've talked about this a lot in a number of different talks. If you've seen my PhD dissertation, I talked about this as well. but it's kind of one of the best examples that I've got for modeling collaboratively with folks in American Samoa. Also talk a little bit about my role as a data curator for Celia Smith's statewide algae and water sampling project. And I'll talk a little bit about my recharge model and how, open source model, and there's a lot of opportunities to expand that model into doing totally different things than was thought about when it was originally envisioned. And I think being open source really kind of enables that. So starting off with the collaborative modeling framework with the American Samoa Power Authority. If you don't know, if you haven't heard it before, the American Samoa Power Authority is essentially the main water utility in American Samoa. They cover water, wastewater, electrical power, solid waste, so they essentially do everything for American Samoa. They're one of the biggest stakeholders that we interact with at the Water Resources Research Center on that island. So they're some good folks to work with. They've got some pretty strong motivation to work with us as well. And they're amazingly, for a small island, 60,000 people, they're really kind of up with the times and really focused on managing their water resources sustainably. They know, they're isolated and those are the only resources that they've got. And so this quote down here from Will Spitzenberg, the main water manager in American Samoa, kind of emphasizes how focused they are on trying to use the most up-to-date, state-of-the-art tools to manage those water resources. And so what this really comes down to is using groundwater modeling, which is the state-of-the-art tool to manage groundwater, which they, just like Hawaii, are totally reliant on to do their management. So the motivation of what we were kind of interested in doing, the reason that we wanted to team up with the American Samoa Power Authority as the Water Resources Research Center, is to kind of bypass this traditional modeling framework. And so I say this traditional groundwater modeling framework, essentially you've got a couple of different options when developing, when a water utility like that wants to develop a groundwater model. They can either pay other people, so consultants or people at the university, to develop a static model, which essentially comes in the form of a report, like these reports here. This is one for Tutuila, one for Southeast Oahu. And the main deliverable that they can use in these reports usually is like a contour map of the water table surface or some calculations scenarios that were run at the time. But these models are static. Even if the consultant provides the actual software files for those models, generally an agency like ASPA isn't going to have the software or the in-house capacity to run those models, right? So their other option is to actually hire an in-house modeler. I think that's even difficult for agencies as large as the Board of Water Supply here, and especially for ASPA, who serves 60,000 people on a small island. It's difficult to keep that level of expertise on the island, much less working at the water utility there. So that's expensive and difficult for them to keep those modelers in-house, but that's a really useful thing, because when they have that capacity at their agency, then they can run their own scenarios. Then when water resource questions come up, they can run different scenarios and put wells in different places and see how different pumping rates affect things. So that's the benefit that we're trying to gain by working with them. So we're trying to make it a win-win and get the best of both worlds by entering in a long-term relationship with the American Samoa Power Authority and trying to assist them with building capacity and building models that they will then continue to have access to for the long run, similar to having an in-house modeler, but with us building that capacity here at WRRC, since that falls into our mission statement as well. And some of the benefits of that is, they understand it better, they buy into it more, they're able to use those models dynamically, and hopefully it's less expensive on both sides to collaborate and team up with each other in the long run. And so if you don't already know where American Samoa is, I'm talking a lot about that. I just wanted to do a quick location map, and so I'll just do a video here. So American Samoa is about halfway between where we are in New Zealand and the Samoan archipelago. It's a chain of, there's 5 main islands in the island chain, and really the 2 biggest ones right there, Savaii and Upolu, that's Western Samoa over on the left. For scale, Savaii is about the size of Oahu, and then Tutuila is the main island in American Samoa. It's got about 60,000 residents, about a tenth the size of Oahu, and it's where, working in American Samoa, where essentially all the population is. So that's the main island that I focus my research on. So you'll be seeing this map in a number of different iterations throughout the presentation here. And so I just wanted to do kind of an overview of what this modeling framework is that we developed between the American Samoa Power Authority and our group at Water Resources here. So this is actually a poster that I put together for AGU, but never ended up presenting because I ended up getting a talk. I thought I was on top of my game doing it beforehand, but ended up having to make a talk anyway. But I think it really summarizes sort of the whole project and the steps involved between our collaboration and taking data from monitoring instruments on the ground that the Power Authority downloads, uploads the data into the cloud, and then we use it for our models, which include a recharge model and a groundwater flow model, which really is the kind of end goal of this project, is to get groundwater flow models, to get the data, to continue to update them. But that end goal thing that the wastewater engineer is looking for is that flow model. So I wanted to kind of just go through these stages on my website. So instead of making slides, kind of all the information I would put on slides sort of is already up here on this website, integratedmodelingframework.weebly.com. So this is just a free website. I made it for the project just to kind of be like the front end sort of face where people could go and just check out what we were doing and see all the parts, because there's a lot of moving parts to it. So this just kind of has an explanation of what we're doing, and then some of the data products too. So this is just an example of one of our data products where this is the groundwater contour lines for the water table from the most recent model run that's in our GitHub repository. And so that most recent run, this isn't the final model version, right? This is actually where I was playing with the hydraulic conductivity on two sides. You can see that this side is a lot different than this one. But what this is, it's like an automatically updating, up-to-date data product that's hosted just through Google Maps API. It's pretty simple, and the data for this is hosted right on our GitHub site, which is essentially where the entire model, all the code, all the input data, all the output data sets, this is where they live. And so GitHub is really the thing that drives this whole project, because that's where it lives. It doesn't live on my computer. It doesn't live on ASPA's computers. It lives on GitHub servers. And so the GitHub page here, and actually I'll just say what it does. So GitHub does a number of things for us. It stores all of our data and provides kind of version control, as well as some of the kind of that social media connection where like people can comment on code, people can tell me when they've uploaded new things, we can send messages back and forth, and then every person has their own profile on GitHub. So we can kind of keep things organized between each other to see who did what. So there's kind of some of the benefits of that. And then what that does, it's all in a public repository, so that keeps everything totally open source, transparent, reproducible. Anybody can go to this website here. So this is the GitHub repository. It's on my personal account, and it's called the Integrated Modeling Framework Repository. And like I said, these are the actual folders where all the code and data lives. This is where the weather station data lives. This is where the stream flow data lives. All the code for processing those things. Documentation that goes with it. So any like reports or anything that describe what's going on can go in there. And another cool thing about GitHub, you can actually assign DOIs to GitHub repositories, and it works through a service called Zenodo. And what this is just an archiving service that lets you basically cite a GitHub repository. So if you wanted to cite my repository in an academic paper, you could just use this DOI right here. And that's pretty cool and pretty handy. And then you can also put some description onto things and provide links to stuff. So basically, yeah, here's a link to the processed weather station data, different groundwater model notebooks, and then pictures of how this whole thing fits together, right? And then a link back to the website there. So that's kind of what GitHub does for us. So I'll go into just a little bit of the nuts and bolts of the actual components of this project. And a lot of you have seen this. A lot of you have helped out with the monitoring network. So here on this map, where the green circles are where we have weather stations. We've got 7 of those up. The blue triangles are where we have stream gauges. These are what those instruments look like. This is ASPA's hydraulic technician, Matt. He downloads all those instruments. And then here's some examples of some of the visualizations that we get when we run the different code. And then also there's links here, so we can link up to the actual data sets, process data, raw data, and this location right here in the repository is actually where Matt drags and drops all the data files when he downloads them. So in that next time the models are run, they just pull them straight from this location. Well, and I'll talk a little bit more about the recharge model in a future part of the presentation, and then just kind of show you the groundwater model part of this page. So we use FlowPy, which is essentially a Python-based wrapper for ModFlow. ModFlow is an open source groundwater modeling code that is available, but it's hard to pre-process the input files and post-process the output files. So FlowPy just helps you do that. So this is the GitHub repository for FlowPy. So this is where USGS puts all of their code to help run FlowPy. And then on this web page, I've just, again, got some explanation. Here's some of the input data sets that go into the groundwater model. Here's some of the output figures after running those models. Yeah, and really, what this system does is it helps me to work with ASPA's hydrologists, so that's one of ASPA's hydrologists right there, build these models and provides kind of a space where they can access all of these things, hopefully have enough explanation to understand what's going on, and then also have enough connectivity to communicate when they need assistance or troubleshooting. Yeah, so that's kind of this project. Just kind of summarizing it. What the whole project's all about is integrating the monitoring network, water budget, modeling, and groundwater models into one kind of framework. We try to use Jupyter Notebooks as much as possible for all of our scripts to promote that open source and reproducibility thing, because essentially what Jupyter Notebooks allow you to do is to make code more interpretable. You can put figures and explanations into the code. We like GitHub for all that it provides, and it provides it for free, which is really nice. And this is an ongoing project. It started in 2015, and looking to involve other stakeholders. The National Weather Service folks in American Samoa are interested in tapping into this as well, so hopefully we can involve some other people in the future too. Well, so the second part that I'll talk about is my data curation activities with Celia Smith's algae and water sampling study. And this, I stole a number of slides here directly from our December 3rd presentation with Bob and Celia regarding this Act 125 project. So I'll go through just a quick intro of what this project actually is. So Hawaii Act 125 was a bill introduced by the state legislature to require the replacement of all cesspools by 2050. And so the reason behind that is because essentially what a number of researchers here at the university and in other places have found is that on-site disposal systems, OSDS cesspools, are related, of course, to impacts that we can see on our nearshore reefs. So that's not something that we want. So the legislature has put this bill in place, and this research project is focused on trying to assess those impacts in the coastal zone using nutrient levels and also isotopic indicators in seaweeds. So that's kind of the framework behind what that project is doing. And also, also using groundwater models. So Bob Whittier is doing groundwater modeling for it. So what I kind of wanted to focus on here mostly was just the field methods. And kind of my point with this is just that we're collecting a whole lot of data. So we're taking water samples, we're taking algae tissue samples, and the way that we've organized it is by taking these samples in these 2-kilometer-long swaths. We've got 10 locations where we take triplicate samples of algae, taking water samples where we can, and then we've got these swaths located, like numerous swaths over every single island in 4 major islands in the island chain. And we've got different teams on each of these islands. So there's 3 to 5 people on each of the islands that are collecting samples, collecting data, processing these samples, sending them in. So yeah, really the main point is we've got lots of data from lots of different people, and all of that needs to stay organized. So this next slide is going to sound a little bit like a Google commercial, but to be honest, we really found that just kind of the free Google tools that are connected, in your inbox. You click that little 9 square symbol on the side of your inbox, and you can get to your Google Drive and all the other apps. They've really made this project super easy to keep organized. And so what we're doing is we're using like a shared drive folder. Lots of people use that. And kind of one of the big things in the very beginning of the project was developing protocols to try to keep everybody's methodology for the scientific part of it, as well as their data reporting and collection methodologies, as standardized as possible across all the teams. And so each of these 4 teams have a folder in this raw data folder. So they're all collecting data, all writing down sample sheets, collecting metadata. Each of the 4 teams have an identical subfolder. It's a little more complicated than that, but basically they've got water data, algae data, and what I'm doing as the kind of curator, compiler of all of that is I'm actually writing scripts to process that data in Google Colab. So if you don't know what Google Colab is, it's another one of these Google apps. And what it essentially does is allow you to run a live Python kernel Jupyter notebook, other languages as well, right in your, essentially, like on your browser. So it's running it on Google's cloud compute, and it's able to access files in that shared drive, and then it's able to write files directly out to that shared drive as well. So those scripts live in the shared folder, and they access the data from the other shared folders. And let me show a quick example of what those look like. So here's an example. This actually isn't a live example because it takes a second to connect in, and I wanted to be a little bit faster. But when you push this connect button, if it's a live web page, what that'll do is it'll connect to a remote virtual machine on Google servers, and then give you a good amount of cloud compute. It's usually more than a normal computer. It's not like supercomputer grade, but it's a good bit. And so this is essentially just a Jupyter notebook right here, which allows you space to put annotations, so you can put explanations up, and then you can write code and execute that code directly. It runs on Google server, and then it'll spit out the results that you have into wherever you tell it on your shared notebook. So just a couple things on this particular notebook here that are really useful. This cell, if you don't have the software that you need installed on this virtual machine, you can just install it right onto the virtual machine from the internet. So this is installing some packages that weren't already in there. And then this is actually these couple lines where the magic happens, where you actually connect this compute kernel into your Google Drive folder. So this is where you do the authentication thing. You do a little step where you put in your password, and that's it. And then you're connected in just as if your Google Drive folder was on your computer and you were running the script on your hard drive. So this script does a bunch of data analysis, processing kind of stuff. We save our map files in KML format, which is really handy for folks that don't have GIS knowledge. And then these notebooks, you can even do these like interactive charts, so you can zoom around on the charts if you want. And so you've got explanations, code, charts, everything all in one notebook. So that's kind of the cool, handy thing with those. And yeah, and so as I said, it spits the results right back out into that folder, so they don't get saved on anybody's computer. They're just in the shared folder. And as I was saying, we make some of our map results in KML format, which you can just send somebody as a simple KML file, and they could just click it. And then if they have Google Earth on their computer, or if they open it up in their web browser on Google Earth, just shows the results on Google Earth right there. So these are the results that we have, the % of nitrogen on for the Maui swath. So this is one of those swaths, and these are the values that we've got so far. And so all of this is kind of instantaneously updatable as people put new data into the folders. All somebody has to do is turn on the Collab notebook, run it, and then this file then will be updated with the new data that's in there. Unless they made any typos on their sample names or sample sites, and then we'd have to fix those typos, unfortunately. We try as much as we can to make it as easy as possible. Well, so that's kind of the summary of that study. So basically, yeah, our scope essentially included collecting these very large quantities of data by a whole lot of people all over the state. And just by using the simple tools that all of us have immediate access to through our email, we were able to keep the entire workflow really contained and totally accessible to everybody in the project. And it's ongoing. And as we get more data, those data sets will just be integrated right into the folders and be accessible to everybody who wants to use it. And by the way, those folders are, that's a shared folder with just that group. So that's not public access. It could be public access if we wanted to make the sharing permissions public, but that's a private shared folder with our 20 people that are on that project. So to kind of finish up here, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the groundwater recharge model that I put together and how making that in kind of this open source format allowed me to expand it into a number of different applications. So just to kind of go over the nuts and bolts of the actual recharge model itself, it's based off of kind of the old school 1955 premise that groundwater recharge is the difference between the amount of rain that falls on the island or the land and all the things that take water away except for soaking into the ground, such as evaporation, canopy interception, runoff, etc. And so this model, what we used for it is existing code from the USGS. This is actually a new code that they put together. It hasn't been around on very many locations, but we ran it for the island of Tutuila, and it's the soil water balance, or SWB2 model. So it essentially takes in all these data sets, sets whatever grid size that I want to set, and does that calculation from that last slide. There's a little more complicated soil moisture processing steps. Basically just is kind of a big GIS calculator that takes all of this information in and then gives you the output. The desired output is this net infiltration that we as groundwater modelers are looking for, but it also gives some other outputs like it's calculated evapotranspiration and runoff and things like that. So that's that recharge model, and one of the main applications, the main thing that we initially devised it for was to use in the modeling framework that I talked about in part 1. So this is that same website again, and this is kind of the second step in that modeling framework, where groundwater models, one of the major inputs to them is a recharge coverage. And so what we can do in that GitHub repository is generate this recharge coverage. We can generate it at different cell sizes. We can change parameters if we need to. We can run scenarios. And one of the big scenarios that we wanted to run were future climate scenarios. So we ran it for the existing future climate scenarios that the IPRC on the 4th floor post put together for American Samoa. And they put these scenarios, RCP 4.5 is it's kind of a moderate emission scenario, 8.5 is a higher emission scenario, and these are run for the end of the century, so 2080 to 2099. So we've got present rainfall, which then we calculated the anomaly from that present rainfall for that end of the century period, and basically just substitute the rainfall as well as the temperature, because that affects the evapotranspiration, into the recharge model, and we got different changes in evapotranspiration and different changes in net infiltration. The particular results of this specific climate scenario suggest that there's going to be more precipitation in the future, thus you reasonably expect more net infiltration, right? One of the cool things, though, about this being a totally open source model, so the model itself is located right here on this GitHub repository. So the idea with everything being here in this folder, this is all the code, this is all the input data. If there's new climate scenarios, it shouldn't be too much work to substitute these new climate scenarios in, just new precipitation and temperature maps, essentially, to the model, and then rerun it with a different prediction. So that's kind of one of the nice things about making this really open source. So that's kind of the initial thing that we were doing with it. Then I started working with the American Samoa EPA too, because they were really interested in nutrient inputs to the coastal ecosystem, just like Celia's group and Bob's interested in here in the Hawaiian archipelago. And so I took the SWB model, which is just a groundwater recharge model, essentially, or a water budget model, and added the input of nutrients to that. So this is kind of a separate branched project. It has its own GitHub repository. All of the files are there. It's got its own DOI. And this project is focused on basically quantifying the amount of dissolved inorganic nitrogen, DIN, that goes to each of these watersheds in American Samoa, and really prioritizing this for management. So it was really focused on managers. So kind of as I said, one of the cool things about GitHub repositories, I was going to put together slides for this, but I just decided that I could put all the information I needed right here on the repository front page. So this has not just instructions to use the model, but a little bit of explanation of the model as well. So this is what comes from the groundwater recharge, or the water budget model, excuse me. And so we're taking those water budget components and basically aggregating them by the specific watersheds on the island. So this is the surface runoff directly from the model. We actually took the net infiltration estimate and separated out into base flow and submarine groundwater discharge based on existing stream flow records. So analyze those. And then what we did is essentially just geospatially added the various nutrient sources that exist on the island. So we kind of define these as cesspools, septic tanks, OSDS locations, piggeries, agricultural lands, and then also included inputs from natural lands as well. So basically what each one of those watersheds then had a tally of was how many cesspools and septic tanks there were, how many pigs were in each of those, and how much agricultural land there was. And kind of the key thing to this was understanding exactly how much we should, how much nitrogen each of these sources should release. Because when it really comes down to it, they're releasing different amounts and we don't actually know what that is. So we made that the main calibration parameter for the model and used a whole bunch of stream sample data and coastal stream data. I think we had like 425 stream samples from 38 individual streams. And so each on this map, you can kind of see these yellow circles. These are the stream sample points. And these were collected by American Samoa EPA Ridge to Reef effort. We also included 26 coastal springs. So a whole lot of data went into that and essentially calculated nutrient loads from every watershed where we had samples. And so we had different kinds of samples in different watersheds. So this map shows like where we had surface water sampled only, which are the yellow watersheds, where we had the coastal spring sampled only, and that's the blue watersheds, and then where they were overlapping are green on that map. So these were essentially the calibration data that we then used, ran just like a simple, I think I have like a Nelder-Mead, just an optimization routine in Python to optimize the values for the loading rates of each of these sources. So when we did that, what we ended up with was a dissolved inorganic nitrogen load from every single one of the watersheds for each of those sources. So this is the aggregated load. So each of these numbers here is the amount of DIN, ideally coming from those watersheds. And we were also able to split it out by source. So this is the amount that came from on-site disposal systems, the amount that came from pigs, and agriculture. So obviously on-site disposal systems is the lion's share of that, and agriculture sources doesn't have very much at all. Now, because you can kind of see it's obviously that there's like a scaling issue where larger watersheds have more sources, thus they have a larger amount of absolute loading. So to kind of conceptualize that a little bit better, I also scaled it by watershed area, which will tell you kind of how much impact is on sort of the terrestrial landscape, and then also by the length of the coastline, which can tell you a little more maybe about how much of an impact it has on the coastal zone where that DIN would be discharging. Now, each of these different scaling methods kind of has its own benefits and its own biases, and we wanted to make a really simple management tool that we could hand to the American Samoa EPA and help them prioritize their management efforts. So what I did is I basically ranked each of these three scaling methods. So ranked every single one of the 93 watersheds from least to highest impact, and then added those ranks up. So without weighting any of them higher than the others, then added those and then ranked it again. And what we end up with is a prioritization ranking. And so what this map shows is essentially which watersheds have the highest impact and which ones have the lowest impact based on an equal weighting of those three scaling methods. The ones in red are the ones with the highest impact, the ones in green are the ones with the lowest. So that's how that nutrient model worked. We gave that to the American Samoa EPA, and they seem to appreciate the simplicity of it. And gave them a whole big report for that. So that's one thing that we kind of forked this SWB model out into. And then another thing that I'm currently working on, this is kind of like current future work almost. So I haven't gotten too far along on this, but we're trying to use this a participatory approach to not just look at future climate scenarios, but also look at future land use, because land use coverages are an input into that water budget model as well. So we did a number of interviews with stakeholders in American Samoa and developed kind of 3 future possible land use scenarios that will then be running with the recharge model in conjunction with those future climate scenarios to give kind of that range of possible futures based on whichever one they want to pick. So right now I'm still working on the GIS coverages for this, and it's kind of taking the back burner. But so this is the only product that I've got for that. But just wanted to mention that that's another kind of cool use for this open source groundwater recharge model here. Yeah, so just kind of summarize that. Basically developed this groundwater recharge model with SWB, kept it open source, which allowed us to do a number of different things with that, and then hopefully if anybody else takes an interest in this, they'll also be able to take that model and build upon it however they wish. It's all open, it's all up there on GitHub, and you can find all of the things that I talked about. So like essentially all of the slides just connected into these 2 websites, either my GitHub site, which has a number of different repositories for each of those projects, or this site that focuses on our collaboration with ASPA. So yeah, feel free to use what you want. It's all open source. It's all like just a free license, and hopefully it ends up useful to somebody. So yeah, with that, I'll take any questions you have.